The Sinner is not your standard psychological thriller because it's a why done it as opposed to a who done it. It's a really fascinating series, currently in its third season. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Duty. I'm here with the show's composer, Ronit Kirchman. Ronit, The Sinner is unique in that it's focused on the psychology of crime, and I was wondering if that was originally what attracted you to the project.
For sure. I love to work with layered material, and I feel for music, psychological depth is kind of a goldmine of possibilities. So it gives you just an expressive reach that's more. So for sure, yes.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking too, because if you're scoring this particular genre, I think there would be a lot of temptation to do a lot of the jump scare technique and a lot of the strings and a lot of the other sounds that we would normally hear in that particular genre. But this show goes really deep in terms of why these killers or these people have perpetrated such horrific crimes. And I think your music is so much more eerie, ambient, and kind of creepy. And I'm just wondering, how do you land on those specific cues and themes to make people feel this sense of dread that you do feel when you watch the show?
Well, so you hit on a few points. I'll try to touch on all of them. For one thing, I think as a composer, I always have a desire to find a new way of saying something. I think that we have many archetypal stories that recur in human storytelling, and the ones that really resonate with people tend to be the ones that present resonant material in a new way, a fresh way. And I know that Derek and I both were very on the same page about not wanting to rely on familiar tropes, but also to kind of maintain an awareness of the genre. You still, want people to have a journey. So there's a big focus for sure on building tension, pacing, creating the impact. But I would say, people are very sophisticated viewers these days. And I think that, sometimes you're looking for a popcorn experience, but when you are looking for a little bit more, then the usual tropes won't work, and they won't create the actual fear, the actual anxiety, the actual surprise. And so I think, the idea is to be very consciously constructing something that ultimately will be a very visceral experience for people. We focus a lot on POV. Who are we? Even in the first season, just the idea of the unreliable narrator. Music can kind of help to reinforce that. When does the warmth and attachment enter, and when does it get kind of pulled out from under you? So I think that there's a lot to be said about, we're looking for ways to renew and subvert, not just because, but also because it makes a more effective story, hopefully, that is more engaging. And we're looking for that sonic signature of the drama. And, you didn't ask about this, but it makes me think of the fact of one of the aspects of composing music for The Sinner that's also quite unique is the structure, the metastructure, which is an anthology with continuity. So each season, the music that I write has to provide a sense of continuity, but also kind of a fresh language for the specific aspects of the criminal subconscious that we're exploring this season.
Yeah, in fact, you just hit the nail on the head in terms of my next question, because I've found that this season's music was quite different, but there's this common thread, especially when we're following Ambroses' journey. And I was just wondering, can you talk us through any specific cues or themes that you use for Ambrose? Because he's a very internalized character. So what are you doing to kind of remind us that we've been following this guy for 3 seasons?
Yeah, so there are thematic motifs that have recurred from seasons 1, 2, and through to 3. Especially from season 2 to 3, they're certain themes associated with Ambrose's domestic life, his personal moments that continue and evolve. So the thing about Ambrose is he's not a static character, and he mirrors and is affected by the cases and the people who he is investigating. And it's a cumulative effect. As he moves forward, he also goes further back into his troubled past. So when we bring back certain cues, the other interesting thing in season 3 is that we're very interested in how Ambrose and Jamie are mirrors of each other and intertwine. So one of the fun things that I got to do is take one of Ambrose's themes from season 2 that's associated with his first time driving into his hometown, Keller, and take that and kind of re-up it for Jamie. I called it Lonely Traveler, when he is on the commuter train. And so it becomes a quite different cue because, it's the V2 of it. But the chord structure and certain instruments, I was also going to say that the palette for Ambrose, I'm building upon, but I'm also keeping certain instrumentation alive, certain colors. And I think that's a very subliminal thing, but hopefully it does have the effect of feeling like you're still in that world. And this season, I think what's creating some of the difference, which is exciting, is that for the first season that we've had the budget to do a live chamber ensemble, so it's a 9-piece string ensemble, and written very kind of specifically to be a complicated counterpoint, and that creates a point on the spectrum that's a little further in one direction, and so the hybrid language becomes a little bit more extreme, and it allows for more surprising variations, I think, because all the electronics are still very active. In season 3, they actually get kind of darker and edgier, and you also have this string vocabulary, which is sinuous but kind of creepy because it's kind of doing its sinuous thing.
I thought maybe I was imagining things. Obviously, I'm no expert, but I've listened and watched a lot of shows and films, and I've listened to a lot of music, and I thought on this season that there was something about it that made it feel more like the anxiety seemed to be more palpable. And maybe it was the use of the strings outside of the electronic aesthetic that just seems to add another layer. Why do you think that is? Is organic instrumentation just something that you really can't replicate on a computer?
Well, that's a whole 20-minute discussion. So for the kind of writing that I wanted to be doing, which was very, very focused chamber sound, very where you can really hear each player, that really needs to be live. And we were fortunate to be able to do that, because I think, without the ability to do that, I probably would have had to find a slightly different solution, because it's the fragility, to contextualize it in terms of the story. Season 3 is very much focused on toxic masculinity and how that is linked with, a very deep vulnerability. And I think that, the strings in particular, we're not using them. Once in a while, there are a couple of places where I harness them for a more horror moment. But overall, their main job is actually to articulate a couple of themes, one associated with the whirly bird, which people who watch the show will know, which really traces this toxic relationship that Jamie, played by Matt Bomer, and Nick, played by Chris Messina, that they have a very unique, fragile, seductive, dangerous, and ultimately very, threatening and nihilistic relationship. And so I think that it's kind of both intuitive and counterintuitive to use the strings to articulate that. So I think in terms of how I'm using the strings, it's not kind of genre-y, and it's kind of more literally finding that sound from scratch in a way. And so as that theme weaves into and kind of infects the entire story, it gets darker. The treatment of the strings changes, just like the kinds of techniques that the players are using. And, I'm very interested always in that, I wouldn't say blurry boundary. It's kind of like there's this field where the organic and the electronic meet. And it becomes a very fertile area when you have that to work with. So in some cases, I would take material that I recorded with live players and then process it. And so I think the fact that you've heard it in one form and then it starts to morph in a very disturbing way that feels unnatural does a little job on us.
It's so appropriate. That's so appropriate for the show.
And I think in terms of the electronic palette, I love to dig in and design sounds to, as part of the composition process. And this season, there's a lot of I think I had to use a lot of creativity with the low register and just like different flavors. There's a gazillion flavors of distorted and gritty, and just finding different ways of creating pace through non-traditional means. So I think that both the acoustic and the electronic sides, in previous seasons I've played multiple instruments on the score live as well, so it's not completely new in that sense. I think there's something about the chamber ensemble, and like you feel it's kind of constellated more with more players.
Yeah, right. I find that I'm drawn more to electronic scores these days. I don't really know why. They seem to affect me more, perhaps maybe because it's the freedom that you may have to distort, as you say. A real highlight for me on season 3 of The Sinner, like I could have shut my eyes and just listened to the scene as opposed to watch it, was when Jamie goes to see Sonia and she takes those photos of him in her studio. It was... I think it was one of the best examples of anxiety and dread and discomfort that you're feeling as a viewer without even having to watch what was going on screen. Can you talk us through the scoring of that particular scene? It was, to me, the highlight of your work this season.
Thank you so much. I love that scene. When I first watched Down the Cut, I was like, I've definitely never seen anything like this on television before. So it took a couple of passes because it's I would say, if you think of it, since Sonia is an artist, we can use some analogies. So I think it was kind of first additive and then subtractive and then additive again. I mean, one of the beauties of our tools as electronic composers is that you don't have to choose one method of sculpture, but I definitely felt like it was a dynamic sculptural project where I was working with fabrics and certain themes. At this point, it's episode 6, so I had a lot of thematic materials to work with and weave together and kind of find places. There were places where I felt like we wanted a really fine thread, and then just the idea of focus, and when did things kind of spread out and feel more immersive, and when did they focus in like a laser in terms of their interaction. And really, I feel like the music there is this, it really is about articulating the collective psychological soup there, the dynamic. It's not, oh, this person has this music and that person has this music. It's like the subconscious forces that these people are dealing with, each in their own way, is very much the material that I was looking to materialize. So, I think that the fact that you have a lot in season 3. You have a lot of these one-on-one mirroring relationships, and I think it's a big surprise when you see Sonia's response, right? It's really unexpected, and so that's a place where I felt there were a lot of moments. The other thing about The Sinner is that the music has to treat each transition very individually, and there were a lot of internal beats in that scene. So, watching it, just mapping out where certain larger shifts would happen. How do you support the surprise without putting a button on it?
It's so interesting. And this is why I think when I hear the argument, the composer's job is just to subliminally affect the audience's experience and not be too invasive, whereas I want the opposite. I think the composer can create almost like a character in itself. And a great example is what you do in episode 6, also in the finale, towards the end. The score is really resonant, and it kind of has to be because you're enveloping these two men as, Jamie, spoiler alert, Jamie is dying in Ambrose's arms. A good example might be Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's work on Watchmen and so forth. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I just do you find that the argument that composers should just stay out of the way and just create some emotional resonance and be done with it is kind of irritating?
Well, at this point, I definitely have heard it all. I think ultimately every project and also every project has its own range of how the music best functions. I think fundamentally, right, the music is a text and a performance, and so it helps to even if somebody is creating a show and they're looking for something where the music is not drawing too much attention to itself, it's still important, I think, to recognize the basic fact that music is text and performance, and it will affect, it's kind of a proactive element even when it's a background element. There's no neutral. It's something. Yeah. That said, I think every project, every film or series has its own range that the story and the creative minds behind it kind of envision for it. So what's really fun about The Sinner is that it has a very wide, I would say, as psychologically, it has a very wide dynamic range. And musically, in terms of how music functions, it also does. So there are times when we have specific melodic themes that are, play as such, and they really are, it's a score forward moment. And then there are times when, even if it's very audible, the music has to, you don't want people to be thinking, hey, that's a cool texture, right? I mean, if they're composers or musicians, they probably will tune into that. But, you want people to dive into the story, right? That's always the goal. But I think in the same way that if you watch a great performance, that actor is part of the world that's being built, right? And you can, you'll probably notice, wow, that's an amazing performance, or that's new, I didn't expect that. But you also at the same time are totally sucked into this, the magic of the story. So I think magic of the story is always what we're serving. It's kind of, we can dial it in. There's it's not just a volume knob, but it's kind of a functionality knob. What score are going to be most helpful for here? But I think it's kind of just like respecting actors who have smaller roles. So in certain scenes, maybe the music has a smaller role, but it still has a role, and you have to respect it. Yes. I think it's important to be nimble with changing how music is functioning. That's part of the job. Yeah.
Now, my final question is something that I usually ask composers who just happen to be women. When Hilda Gudnadottir won the Oscar earlier this year for Joker, it's one of my favorite scores of all time. I listen to it all the time. It reminded me that with so many women in in music and entertainment, like, you know, there's so many famous and amazing talents. Why don't women composers get the same opportunities that male composers do? Do you have an opinion on that, or do you think it's nonsense and it just doesn't matter what your gender is?
Well, I think that there's a lot of there's been a big consciousness shift in the past 3 years or so that is palpable. I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of, so I think it's when the percentage is 2%, 3%, it's undeniable that there's some sort of subconscious, if not conscious, factor that's limiting the advancement in the careers of women. But I think that I have noticed a very big shift in how just the hiring attitudes are changing, and I think that, you know, Hildur winning the Oscars, like an amazing, wonderful, symbolic, and powerful thing to happen, just to kind of reinforce that, right? It's not just what people want to happen, it is happening. And there have always been a lot of, you know, I would say unbiased or creatively oriented directors and showrunners who aren't really thinking that way. But I think that since on big projects, there needs to be, I think because film scoring, there are various factors at play, right? There's the kind of grandfathering in of things, but there's also a certain perception. It's like kind of a magical art, you know, not everybody feels 100% comfortable. And so maybe the risk-averse nature of hiring might be amplified in that realm. So I think that, you know, what's nice is that I think that things are, the whole dialogue, the way people think about talking about it, there's no longer, you know, you used to hear, well, it's probably a reflection of a lack of interest. Now that's like very not okay to say for obvious reasons. So, you know, I think that there's more awareness and there are more women getting hired, and so that's good. So we'll keep it going.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Ronit, for your time. Thanks for an exceptional work on The Sinner Season 3, and good luck this coming Season 4 if we happen to get one.
Yes, thank you so much. It's really been fun to talk to you.
Now, everyone, go to goldderby.com, make your predictions, and don't forget to click subscribe. We've got lots of contender chats just like this one with Ronit.